Sampurasun, Sugeng Rawu, Huan Young, Horas. Hello guys, welcome back.
WSKT TV.
This night, the land will be stained with the blood of Rohan! You have no authority here. Your orders mean nothing.
It comes from the king. He signed it this morning.
How are you all? I hope you're all in good health and blessed with abundant fortune. We're back with you on WSKT TV. This time, we'll be reviewing the epic fantasy, adventure, and action film The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, released in 2002. The film is almost 3 hours long, but our review only takes about 30 minutes. Because it's an old film for a review, it's perfect for revisiting. This film won numerous prestigious awards, including an Oscar, for its timeless epic story. The story begins with a legendary ring, the Ring of the Lord, a dark legacy belonging to Sauron, the Dark Lord. Previously, we reviewed the film about a ring that fell into the hands of a simple hobbit named Bilbo. And in this film review, Bilbo Baggins, a peace-loving hobbit, is dragged into a grand adventure with Gandalf and the dwarves to reclaim the kingdom of Erebor from the dragon Smaug. Along the way, he discovers courage and wisdom that change his life forever. This film is the first of 3 film adaptations of the 1937 novel The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Directed by Peter Jackson, starring Elijah Woodian, McKellen Martin, Freeman, Richard Armitage, James Nesbitt, Ken, Stott Sylvester, McCoy Berry, Humphreys, and many more. Let's take a look at the storyline. Okay guys, let's check it out. After the Fellowship of the Ring, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli realized that Quando had chosen a dangerous path, one that only those willing to sacrifice everything could take. They did not pursue him. Quando continued on his own journey toward a dark destiny in the east. They ran through forests and fields, chasing the Uruk-hai army that had kidnapped Merry and Pippin. Meanwhile, deep in the mines of Moria, a battle that would live forever was raging. Gandalf the Grey stood tall on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, facing off against the Balrog, an ancient demon wreathed in fire and darkness.
What is it, Mr. Frodo?
Elsewhere, beneath a gloomy sky and rocky hills, Quando and Sam now walked alone. Day turned to night. Each step brought them further from the peaceful Shire, and closer to a destiny that would decide the fate of all Middle-earth. One night, a thin, creeping figure, the creature that once held the ring, crept closer. Gollum. Driven by his infatuation with his precious, Gollum attacked, but Quando saw something different. He understood the burden the ring left on a person's soul.
Release him, or I'll cut your throat.
He recognized the suffering that had been eating away at Gollum from within. Quando decided to let him go. But there was one condition: Gollum had to be their guide to the Black Gate of Mordor. But a conflict within Gollum began to surface. He spoke to himself, two personalities warring within one body. And with uncertain steps, the journey into the heart of darkness began. But questions continued to loom. Can Gollum truly be trusted?
Follow me.
Across the vast expanse of the plains of Rohan, a herd of Uruk-hai surged forward, carrying two precious captives. Merry and Pippin, right behind them. Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli traveled endlessly, hunting for 3 days without rest. Legolas was able to read the Uruk-hai's intentions: Isengard, Saruman's fortress, where the White Witch is gathering a large army for Sauron. Meanwhile, in the heart of the kingdom of Rohan, King Theoden, once mighty and wise, is now but a shadow of his former glory. He sat on his throne in silence. Rohan's power was slowly controlled by the poisonous tongue of Grima Wormtongue, a palace advisor who turned out to be Saruman's loyal servant. Outside the kingdom walls, the orc army and wild men of Dunland invaded without mercy. Villages that were once prosperous are now full of people's echoing screams. Tragedy struck Rohan even deeper. Crown Prince Theodred, sole heir to the throne, was mortally wounded in the battle at the fords of Isen. For the people, it was a sign of doom. For Grima, it was a step in the plot to conquer Rohan Eomer. Theoden's nephew and leader of the last loyal cavalry sensed betrayal. Wormtongue twisted Eomer's words and whispered slander into the king's ear. Finally, Theoden pronounced his sentence. Eomer was exiled from Rohan, banished from the land he had defended with blood and honor.
You have no authority here. Your orders mean nothing.
It comes from the king. He signed it this morning.
Meanwhile, far away on the vast plains of Rohan, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli were tireless, a fire blazing, a sign that the Uruk-hai had stopped to rest. The fire was not just light, but a signal that the war had just begun. In the darkness of the night, Merry and Pippin held their breath. One of the orcs, Hasret, impatient to endure his hunger, came up with a cruel idea: to eat their captives, two small hobbits deemed worthless. This statement enraged the Uruk-hai. The dispute erupted into brutal combat. Merry and Pippin looked at each other. With courage born of desperation, the cavalry of Rohan, led by Eomer the Forsaken, came crashing in like a golden storm. The next day, under the pale skies of Rohan, Eomer met Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. He brought sad news. No one had survived the previous night's battle, especially Aragorn, that his two childhood friends were dead. Following his instincts and keen eye, Aragorn discovered the trail leading them to an ancient, mist-shrouded forest, Fangorn. Meanwhile, deep within Fangorn, Merry and Pippin faced death once again. An orc who had escaped the slaughter nearly drew its knife on them.
Fangorn, what madness drove me there?
Out of the darkness emerged a mossy giant. Eyes as old as the mountains, he was Treebeard. The Elder Ent, the guardian of the ancient forest, Treebeard's voice echoed heavily as he lifted the two little hobbits and carried them deeper into the heart of the forest. But elsewhere, far to the east, Quando and Sam struggled across the death marshes. Beneath their surface, fallen faces called out from the depths of darkness. Tempted by the whispers of spirits, Quando stepped too close and plunged into the icy waters that dragged him to his death. As Sam cried out his name, the air around him turned cold, and from the shadows, something emerged, something that had been following them, waiting for the right moment to strike. At the edge of the death marshes, as Quando nearly sank into the darkness, a thin, pale figure leaped from the mist. Gollum, the creature long enslaved by the ring, saved him. But that night, in the dim light of the campfire, something unexpected happened. Quando called him by a name the world had long forgotten, Smeagol. For the first time in centuries, Gollum's eyes reflected a gleam of light. From the eastern sky, the Nazgul hunted again. They hid among the mud and stone, a fell beast. The terrible steed of the Ring Riders. When its roar faded, only silence remained. Meanwhile, far away in Fangorn Forest, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli stood tense. A figure in white robes appeared. It was Gandalf, but it was no longer Gandalf the Grey, but Gandalf the White, the wizard reborn. He told of the battle in the bottomless pit with the Balrog. The two fell together, and at the end of all fire, Gandalf was victorious, but that victory demanded his rebirth, stronger, purer, a messenger of hope in the darkest of times. Gandalf summoned Shadowfax, the great horse, leader of all horses in the world of men. At the speed of light, they raced toward Edoras, the heart of Rohan, where King Theoden remained imprisoned by Saruman's magic. On the other side, Quando, Sam, and Gollum's journey ended before the Black Gate of Mordor. The gate loomed large, like a steel jaw ready to swallow any who dared approach. Behind a rock they hid, watching the march of the Eastern army, the Easterlings. Thousands of warriors and the sound of iron chains filled the air. But Sam slipped and fell down a steep rock, nearly caught by the guards. Quando quickly covered them with a magical cloak from Galadriel, making them appear like mere stones to the enemy. When the danger had passed, silence fell upon them, but before he could take a step, Gollum grabbed his arm. In a trembling voice, he offered an alternative. A secret path, hidden from enemy eyes and guarded only by shadows older than Mordor itself. Sam didn't believe him, but Quando saw something deeper, not Gollum the foul creature, but Smeagol still fighting for his life.
Lead the way, Smeagol.
Good speed always helps.
Not far away, in Rohan, the fortress of Edoras loomed over the wind-swept fields. The sky was gray, the wind carrying whispers of sadness. Gandalf arrived with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. They were greeted with suspicious looks and drawn swords. They were disarmed, but Gandalf was left with his staff. It looked simple, no more than a walking stick. But in the silence of the Golden Hall, before the silent King Theoden, the wizard's true power slowly awakened. Theoden's face looked old, his eyes gloomy, his soul imprisoned by Saruman's evil magic. But Gandalf stepped forward, looked directly into the king's eyes, and shouted loudly, "Arise, Theoden, King of Rohan!" The arrival of Gandalf with only his white staff, Gandalf stood in front of Theoden. His eyes were shining and light was burning from his staff. Finally, Saruman's evil spirit screamed, thrown out of Theoden's body. Theoden's originally old body now had his eyes open. Looking around him, the King of Rohan has risen again from his long sleep. But this victory was paid for by sorrow. Theoden looked at his son's body. He knelt down, embracing the body of the heir who would not return. At Gandalf's urging, the people of Rohan were led back towards Helm's Deep. But Gandalf knew, and he set out, riding Shadowfax, promising to return in 5 days with the reinforcements of Éomer and his 2,000 loyal men.
At dawn, look to the east.
Meanwhile, Grima Wormtongue, there, warned his master of the rising of Rohan and Gandalf's return. Saruman, furious and alarmed, immediately sent his warg riders to hunt down the refugees in the plains of Rohan. On the other side, Quando, Sam, and Gollum's journey ended before the Black Gate of Mordor. The gate loomed large, like a steel jaw ready to swallow anyone who dared approach. Behind a rock, they hid, watching the march of the Eastern Army, the Easterlings. Thousands of warriors and the sound of iron chains filled the air. But Sam slipped, falling down the steep rocks, nearly caught by the guards. Quickly, Quando covered them with a magical cloak from Galadriel. Making them appear like mere stones to the enemy. When the danger passed, silence fell upon them, but before he could take a step, Gollum grabbed his arm in a trembling voice. He offered an alternative, a secret passage, hidden from enemy eyes and guarded only by shadows older than Mordor itself. Sam didn't believe him, but Quando saw something deeper. Not Gollum the foul creature, but Smeagol still fighting for his life. Not far away, in Rohan, the fortress of Edoras towered over the windswept plains. The sky was gray, the wind carrying a whisper of sadness. Gandalf arrived with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. They were greeted with suspicious looks and drawn swords. Their weapons were disarmed, but Gandalf was left with his staff. It looked simple, no more than a walking stick. But in the silence of the Golden Hall, before the silent King Theoden, the wizard's true power slowly awakened. Theoden's face looked old, his eyes gloomy, his soul imprisoned by Saruman's evil magic. But Gandalf stepped forward, looked directly into the king's eyes, and cried aloud, "Awake, Theoden, King of Rohan!" Gandalf arrived with only his white staff, standing before Theoden, his eyes shining and the light blazing from it. Finally, Saruman's evil spirit screamed and was thrown from Theoden's body. Theoden's once decrepit body opened, and he looked around. The King of Rohan had risen from his long slumber, but the victory was met with sorrow. Theoden gazed upon his son's body. He knelt, embracing the body of the heir who would never return. At Gandalf's urging, the people of Rohan were led back to Helm's Deep. But Gandalf knew, and he set out, riding Shadowfax, promising to return in 5 days with the reinforcements of Éomer and his 2,000 loyal troops. Meanwhile, Grima Wormtongue, there, warned his master of Rohan's awakening and Gandalf's return. Saruman, furious and alarmed, immediately sent his warg riders to hunt down the refugees in the fields of Rohan.
This night, the land will be stained with the blood of Rohan! To war!
Far to the south, Smeagol and Gollum fought, not with weapons, but with their split souls. Smeagol, the innocent, fought Gollum, the shadow chained by the desire for the ring. His heart was free for a moment. Quando, Sam, and Smeagol, they were transfixed by a majestic sight, the Mumakil, the giant mammoth of Harad. The silence was shattered as the Gondor army attacked. In the frenzy of battle, Quando and Sam are captured by gray-hooded warriors led by Faramir, captain of Gondor, and the late Boromir's younger brother. Meanwhile, Smeagol, frightened and confused, disappears into the forest, leaving Quando and Sam behind. Éowyn begins to see Aragorn not just as a hero, but as hope. Meanwhile, in the distance, Arwen, the woman who controls his heart, prepares to leave Rivendell, heading for the immortal lands with her people, leaving behind the mortal world and a love that cannot be maintained. But from the darkness, the warg riders, the beasts of Saruman's followers, came like a storm. The screams of horses, the clink of swords, and the footsteps of wild creatures echoed throughout the field. Legolas fired arrow after arrow, taking down the enemies one by one. Theoden showed the courage of a true king, leading his troops fearlessly. But in the midst of the chaos, Aragorn is dragged by an enraged warg and thrown from a high cliff, falling into a fast river. When the battle subsided, Legolas found only Aragorn's pendant in the hand of the dead orc, a sign of grief that silenced all hearts. Éowyn could barely hide her tears. Despondent, the people of Rohan continued their journey to their last stronghold, Helm's Deep. There, beneath a gray sky, they stood gazing at the mighty walls that towered like a mountain of stone. The fortress that had been a symbol of their last hope now felt like a waiting tomb, and amidst the silence, Gimli, with a heavy heart, delivered the sad news: Aragorn, the hope.
They say that it is hopeless.
There is always hope.
The hero had been lost in battle, high in the tower of Orthanc. Saruman gazed out of a stone window, his lips curling slyly. Before Wormtongue, he displayed his greatest pride, 10,000 Uruk-hai, born of darkness, ready to devour the world of men. His command was firm: kill them all. Let not a single one breathe. Meanwhile, in Rivendell, Elrond pleaded with, there is still hope, though it is as thin as a glimmer of light in the shadows of night. Galadriel's voice echoed in Elrond's mind, gentle yet jolting. Will the elves remain silent? Will they leave men to fight the darkness alone? If the elves are gone and men fall, who will light the last candle for a world plunged into eternal night? On the riverbank, a horse appeared out of the mist. Brego, a loyal friend who still remembered his master. Aragorn's body was covered in wounds. With the last of his strength, he pulled himself onto Brego's back. They crossed valleys and steep cliffs, while in the distance, the Uruk-hai marched endlessly toward Helm's Deep. When Aragorn finally arrived at the fortress, the people of Rohan greeted him with cheers. A hero thought dead had returned, but their joy was short-lived. The mighty fortress now looked fragile, with only 300 men left to face 10,000 enemies. Aragorn pleaded with Theoden for reinforcements, but the king, still haunted by fear and the destruction of the past, chose to stand his ground without extending a hand. Rohan asks no mercy, he said in a deep voice. But beneath that firmness lay despair. The women and children were moved to the sheltering caves, while men young and old clutched swords, axes, or anything else that could be used as a weapon. Meanwhile, far south in the rocky caverns of Henneth Annen, Quando and Sam were brought before Faramir, the late Boromir's younger brother. He was a mighty figure, but his eyes bore old wounds, the wounds of a child who grew up in the shadow of a perfect brother. To their father, Denethor, Faramir was nothing but a living failure. That night, Quando awoke to find Gollum by the pool, playing with his own reflection in the water. But beneath the calm, the archers of Gondor had their bows ready, awaiting Faramir's command to fire. Quando, overcome with fear and love, cried out to them to halt their attack. He confessed everything, about the ring, about their journey, about the danger that lurked. The trust that had grown between Quando and Gollum shattered in an instant. Smeagol stared at him with wounded eyes, a betrayal that cut deeper than a sword. Gollum took over his body once.
So it begins.
More. The temptation to take him to Gondor burned in his heart, a chance to prove himself to his father. But within him, conscience still fought against ambition. Meanwhile, in the ancient forest of Fangorn, the Ents held the world's oldest council, the Entmoot. For centuries they had been silent. Now they must decide, stay rooted in their own land or rise against Saruman's fire. Merry and Pippin waited anxiously, hoping the decision would come before it was too late. Night fell. At Helm's Deep, the warriors stood on the wall, thunder rolled, and 1,000 pairs of feet could be heard. The elven army from Lothlorien, led by Haldir, arrived with a message from Elrond that though their people's glory had faded, hope was not dead. The spirits of the past come to stand with men, Haldir said, his eyes fixed on Aragorn with reverence. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the darkness, revealing the vast Uruk-hai army advancing without hesitation. The enemy's war cries echoed, haunting the stone passages and caves where the women and children hid. On the walls, the soldiers stood firm against a burning fear. Until finally, a lancer accidentally let fly an arrow. The silence broke and the battle began. The elven archers were the first to attack. Their arrows flew swiftly, gleaming like silver rain in a storm. Soon, human archers joined in. Thousands of arrows shot from the walls, raining down on the crumbling Uruk-hai front, but they pressed on. The enemy's retaliatory arrows rained down on the ramparts. Ladders were embedded in the walls, and beasts began to climb. Swords clashed, blood flowed, and helmets dipped into a fiery battlefield. The bravery of the Rohan warriors, along with Aragon and his companions, held off the first wave. But Saruman had other plans. A lone Uruk-hai ran, approaching the wall with an explosive device. There was a momentary pause, a tense silence, then, without wasting a moment, the Uruk-hai charged in. The gate was destroyed. The last defenses began to crumble. Aragon and Gimli desperately defended the gate, but the enemy pressure was too great. Though the defenders fought valiantly, wall after wall began to fall. In the chaos, Haldir, leader of the elves, was killed. The fortress slowly began to crumble, inch by inch. Even King Theoden was wounded in battle. In a desperate attempt, Aragon and Gimli broke through to the bridge, cutting their way through the throng of enemies. But the waves of enemies continued to come. New ladders continued to rise, and Legolas fought desperately to bring them down one by one, but time seemed to be running out. The walls were now almost completely fallen. The last of the warriors retreated into the main. Keep Aragon and Gimli climbed the rope and rejoined them. One thing was clear. Helm's Deep had been breached, and the night was not over. Amidst the heated battle, the voices of the ancient trees echoed softly. Tribird, the eldest En, made it clear that the En's decision seemed final. This war was not theirs. And victory seemed snatched from the brink of destruction. The Uruk-hai, who once inspired fear, were now gripped by fear. They fled to Fangorn Forest. Unbeknownst to them, the Ents awaited. There, nature rose in fury. The Ents slaughtered the remaining survivors, wreaking vengeance for the forest they had destroyed. In Isengard, nature was finally enraged. From the once silent Fangorn Forest, the Ents rose carrying a millennia-old rage. Saruman's majestic fortress was now the target of an unstoppable green storm. They tore down the stone walls one by one, breaking the dams until the floodwaters overflowed, engulfing the fires and the ironworks, blackening the sky. The scream of metal mingled with the roar of the water, and for the first time Isengard succumbed not to magic, but to the forces of nature. Saruman, the white wizard who had betrayed the light, was now trapped within his own tower, Orthanc. He gazed upon the ruin of his work, while outside, the Ents stood like ancient guardians returning to exact justice for the plundered forest. But the story was not over. Far to the east, among the dark ruins of Osgiliath, Quando, Sam, and Gollum were held by Faramir, son of Denethor, the Guardian. The city was a ghost of the past. The walls cracked, the Anduin flowing slowly, bringing the shadow of Mordor to the eastern horizon. But the darkness had not yet vanished. From the red-clouded sky came a shrill cry. The Nazgul came, riding on giant winged creatures, scenting the ring. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The warriors of Gondor knelt. Quando clutched his chest, the ring vibrating, whispering promises of power and freedom. His eyes were blank, his body trembling, and for a moment he almost gave up. But Sam stood before him, holding his hand with simple courage. "There is still good in this world, Lord Quando," he said in a trembling voice, "and it is worth fighting for." Those words reignited a small light in Quando's heart. Faramir, watching the scene, was silent for a long time. He realized that these two small creatures bore the fate of the world, and finally he made a great decision, to let them go, even if it meant defying his father's will and defying fate. The victory at Helm's Deep was only the beginning. Gandalf knew that the true battle had yet to begin. A battle not against the armies, but against the darkness that grew in the hearts of every creature. Meanwhile, beneath the gloomy skies of Mordor, Gollum walked behind them, a sly smile spreading across his disfigured face. In his mind, a sinister plan begins to form, a plan to lead Quando and Sam down a secret path, a path that will only lead to betrayal. Thank you. Until we meet again for more exciting film reviews, adios amigos, amigos.